the question remains, is it best to go defense matrix or to go with the energy drain? So here are our options. Carnage, which we got from James, rip a target into shreds with this vicious blast. Major collateral damage to enemies nearby. Effective against armor. Good against armor. Can, I believe, detonates a bunch of things. Everything but biotic explosions. It has a brief priming period, very brief priming period for fire explosions. Fair bit of damage. Has a little bit of an AoE. And has a fairly high force factor, I think, as well, so it can knock people back fairly reliably. Energy Drain is the one that I was just talking about that we might want. This is coming from Tally. Hit an enemy with this energy pulse to inflict damage, and Steel Barrier and Shield Power. Works really well against shields and barriers and synthetics. We really have not encountered any. Well, I guess we've encountered some synthetics in it. We've encountered some turrets and Cerberus Atlases. That's pretty much it thus far, but since we're going into a Geth Dreadnought, presumably we're going to run into primarily Geth, who we actually have not seen at all yet in Mass Effect 3. Of course, they were in many ways the primary enemy in Mass Effect 1, and although not quite as common in Mass Effect 2, they certainly did still make some appearances. So having Energy Drain against Geth would be great because Geth tend to be very shield-oriented, and the thing with Energy Drain is that it works for enemies with shields, enemies with barriers, and specifically for any synthetic enemy, regardless of whether they have shields or barriers. So it's universally applicable to the Geth. Whereas for organics that don't have any shields or barriers, then suddenly it doesn't really work. So that's the one sort of shortcoming of Energy Drain. So all effectively great for that reason, if we're expecting to go against Geth. And it does also restore shields to Shepard, so that's nice too. Defensively does have some aspects to it. The thing is, you do need, of course, to have a target to hit with Energy Drain in order for that to work. Whereas the other thing we were thinking about, Defense Matrix, reinforce armor with protective focal currents, purge the currents to restore shields. It does slow power use while it's active. The thing about this is that it gives passive damage protection, which is not something that Energy Drain does. It does restore shields, much like Energy Drain does, except in this case, it is purely on demand and doesn't require that we have an enemy right in front of us to target with the Energy Drain, or whatever the skill in question in this case is, which, I mean, obviously most of the time that you're taking a lot of damage is going to be when you have enemies in front of you, but there are some situations in which having the ability to restore shields without an enemy right in front of us can be beneficial. One of them would be the Reaper that was stomping on us on Tuchanka. However, we did not yet have access to Defense Matrix when we were doing that mission. And, we might have another use case for it coming up very soon. Warband was actually not bad. Got this, of course, from, I believe, Liara. And giving us extra damage for biotic abilities is nice, but maybe not our top priority here. Fortification is basically James' version of Defense Matrix. Also gives some passive defensive buffs. Make it so you take less damage, but when you purge this, rather than getting shields back, you increase your melee damage, which is not as interesting to us. Armor-piercing ammo from Garrus. We've seen him absolutely demolish bosses with his armor-piercing capabilities. This is one component of that equation, but not really what we're looking for here right now. Slam we got from Javik. It is a biotic ability, and so there's something to be said for having a way to, well, detonate more biotic combos. Technically, it does have a brief moment for priming as well, but we have so many ways to prime and detonate biotics right now that that's not really a shortcoming of ours. We'd much rather have something that increases our versatility. Well, then, the only thing we haven't looked at would be Inferno Grenade, which we got, I believe, early on from Ashley. Cluster Bomb, a small area with incendiary munitions. For the most part, we do have a grenade ability ourselves, our Cluster Grenade, so I don't really think Inferno Grenade is going to add too much that we don't already have with that, as basically just a huge source of burst damage, or potentially crowd control as well. So, yeah, the question is basically, do you Defense Matrix, or do you Energy Drain? It does cost a little bit of credits, so this will mean we'll be a little bit farther away from getting to the 125,000, but I think, after finishing this next mission, we should be fine. So, the more versatile defensive option, or the combine some defense with offense option. It's tough. It is tough. I guess... I was originally thinking we'd go Defense Matrix, but Energy Drain is certainly tempting. I think the passive defensive components, though, of Defense Matrix are really solid, especially in higher difficulties. I think we go for that. And that means we now have this new ability showing up here. We can see the specifics. This was, of course, an ability that previously we only saw on Edie. So at level 1, it gives us 15% damage reduction, which actually is slightly less than that in truth, because I believe that damage reduction number there is based on the amount of damage reduction you get while in cover with this ability, because you get additional damage reduction while in cover. Outside of cover, the number is actually a little bit smaller. I forget what the value is, though. If it's... we only get 60% of this 15% when we're outside of cover. That'd be pretty steep penalty for being outside of cover, or pretty generous bonus for being in cover, if you're looking at it that way. But the biggest thing is the whole restoring shields whenever you'd like to. It does, however, slow power use by 60%, which sounds like a ton. It actually is not quite as bad as it seems, because rather than being a just increase all power recharge times by 60%, if you think about the number that we see when we're selecting our weapons on the weapon selection screen, where it can go as low as negative 200 or as high as plus 200% improved recharge speed, that number gets reduced by 60. That's what gets affected, which is technically a little bit better for us than just giving a direct minus 60 or 60% worse recharge time directly to the skill. So in that way, it's not atrocious. We could get all the way up to rank 3 here. So that would mean getting the base ability, increasing the recharge speed. Activating the ability does not trigger the recharge, fortunately. What it does do is, it gives us the passive bonus. It's only when we purge the shields that, or when we purge the defense matrix to regain our shields, that the cooldown triggers. So means we can regenerate our shields every 8 seconds, which is probably slower than our standard shield recharge time. But there are some instances when, even if you would normally get your shields back, you might still need to use a defense matrix purge to actually get them to come back quickly enough, because maybe you can't wait for someone to, well, I guess if you just recently purged, then yeah, you're still going to be off cooldown. But yeah, anyways, just generally speaking, in particular with damage over time, if damage over time is like slowly going to whittle you down to death, then obviously purging is a big deal, because that immediately prevents or stops the damage from continuing to tick and gets you back up to a place where you have shields. So, I mean, we probably just go 3 points into this. That's kind of why we were saving these 7 points here. Next level is probably going to be a bigger deal, where we start to get either more shield restoration up to, I think that'll be, no stacking yet? I think that gets up to 100%. You combine this with this, or the passive 5% damage reduction while we have it active. Either way, let's throw these on here. And if we find that we don't like the power recharge speed penalty, then we can just leave this thing turned off. Obviously, wasted skill points in that case, but it at least gives us the option of going that route, which I think is important that we have that, in particular for this upcoming mission. So let's head back up. And let us see what the deal is here with the Geth Dreadnought. So disable the Dreadnought that is supposedly trapping the migrant fleet here, which is currently hiding on the other side of Typhoon, this star. So there it is. It looks kind of similar to some of the Geth dropships that we saw a lot of in Mass Effect 1, although presumably what with this being a Dreadnought, which is too big to actually enter into any planet's atmosphere, it's presumably much bigger. Scans of the Geth Dreadnought orbiting Rannoch reveal an intimidating array of features, from an improved main gun and ultraviolet anti-ship lasers to increased thruster output. The Geth workforce never demands rest, wages, or autonomy, and in the creation of their flagship, they were limited only by time and raw materials. The damage inflicted by the Quarian fleet appears minor at best. Yeah, so basically this thing is fully functional right now, and we're about to just hop right on in. What could possibly go wrong, right? What could possibly go wrong? Sure. Let's do it. Okay, and in case you couldn't tell, yes indeed, we did truly get Tali back on the squad after having her join up with us from Priority Percy's Vale. So let's take a quick look at, we look at her appearances. We see what various bonuses are. This one is power damage versus power recharge speed. So we've not yet gotten the chance to look at what Tali's skills are, but I can tell you right now, she has a lot of recharge speed. So I think giving her an additional 25% might be at the point of pretty serious diminishing returns. Also, what about this one? Weapon damage. Okay, also an option. I do definitely prefer this one. I think of this one as sort of like the classic Tali look right here. I can kind of see that one working too, just purely aesthetically, but I think I like the first one the best. As I said, I think diminishing returns for power recharge, weapon damage, although technically something we can try to do to a certain extent for Tali, that is very much something that people like Garrus, Ashley, and James, and even to a certain extent, Javik, are perhaps more the experts on. I mean, like, Garrus is never going to be outclassed for damage. Maybe Ashley with rate of fire might come close, though. So, no, we're going to go for the power damage route, because Tali is, of course, our engineer specialist. And we can see her abilities here, in fact. Sabotage, Combat Drone, Energy Drain, Defense Drone, Quarian Machinist. Things that we'll talk about more in greater detail in just a bit. So, Tali is required for this mission, whether you like her or not. And if you do not like her, then, well, we got some talking to do. But other than that, we, assuming that we are running into Geth here, would like to prepare for synthetics and for shields, which, as I was saying, we just have not seen too many of that. Generally speaking, we've been using Edie and Garrus as our designated anti-shields people. Garrus just because he happens to have overload. Edie does as well, but Edie might have... Did he have one or two other things that can be useful for that? No, I mean, Incinerate is anti-armor, so not necessarily. But, technically speaking, there is some interesting dialogue if we are to bring James along with us here. So, the problem is, he's very much an anti-armor person, not an anti-shields person. So that does make me a little nervous. He's definitely not the ideal candidate in this case from a gameplay standpoint, but from a dialogue standpoint, he might be the most interesting. So, are we willing to take that risk, make that sacrifice, in the interest of getting some cooler interactions? It's gonna be tough, but I think we might try. And remind me for him, that's shields, weapon damage. It has been so long since we last used him. Also weapons damage, also shields. I think we'll just go for the starting one for the shields. Actually debatable. Specifically for this mission. For this mission, we'll go weapons damage. Okay. So, and the thing is, for both James and Tali, they are shotgun users. So, even though it does not show what Tali's weapons are, because we haven't used her yet, but yeah, shotguns for both of them. And so, if you couldn't tell why I was trying to prioritize getting some nice shotgun weapon damage up, or shotgun weapons to choose from, because we have a pretty lackluster list right now. Yeah, this was why. This was why. So we bring Tally, we bring James, we cross our fingers, we hope that James is not too much of a liability here. Okay, so then for weapons, for us, we should be looking pretty good. But remember, for James, it's been a really long time since we last used you, so we're on Vindicator and Katana. Yeah, probably no thanks. And Tally, it's our first time, of course, ever bringing her along with us, so it's Predator and Katana for her. Also, not great. Let's start with James. For James, Particle Rifle was actually an interesting idea with his incendiary ammo, because this, I think, still has a faster rate of fire than the Typhoon, so it is the best way to proc his incendiary ammo explosions as quickly as possible, which we just never really got the chance to try out. We theorized about it, but we just haven't seen it yet because we haven't used James in forever. However, the Typhoon, from just a pure damage standpoint, outside of the more extraneous incendiary ammo explosion effects, is better. And Typhoon probably is... Remember for Particle Rifle what its damage multiplier, if anything, is like for shields. The Typhoon does have a damage multiplier for any type of defenses, including shields. So for that reason, I feel like we might just want to go with the Typhoon, because, as we were saying, James is not necessarily the best squad mate gameplay-wise. Again, prioritize shield removal skills, so Tally, of course, provides some of that, but Edie or Garrus would probably make the most sense for that other person. So then let's load up on damage here with the extended barrel and probably that piercing. Yeah, especially because Garrus has a ton of piercing from all of his abilities, whereas James does not necessarily have that. Armor piercing, this is. So, and cover piercing. So for Garrus, it's like, he can do without that, ignoring 35% of defenses, whereas for James, it's like, that's his only way of ignoring the defenses of armor, so it's probably worth throwing that on for him. Okay, so there's the Typhoon. For longer range, medium range, really, engagements, we're not going to have much in the way of great long-range options. My concern is that oh my goodness. Okay, for a second I thought we only had the Scimitar and the Katana. I was like, no way. No, we have more than this, right? So those are both pretty darn bad. We do have the Grawl, which might be the best option for us. I forget as to how effective squad mates are with it, because it is a little gimmicky, the way that it does technically require that, or it doesn't require that you charge it up, but it does deal more damage if you charge it up. It may still be good enough even without that to be worthwhile. One of the downsides is that it has a lot of weight to it. It's high damage, but high weight. So, of course, with squad mates not caring about weight, that may mean that it's pretty solid for them. It might be worth a try. I think especially for James, he's going to be relying mostly on using the Typhoon. So we can take a little bit more of a risk here with the shotgun, and if it's an atrociously awful idea, then we should still be fine. Don't personally use the Grawl very often. I imagine the Smart Choke is useful. The bar there seems to suggest that it has pretty solid accuracy for a shotgun. I think it is usable without it, but generally, Smart Choke is a pretty big deal on shotguns, just to make it so that the pellet spread is more likely to actually hit the target in question. The Grawl, though, does function differently. It shoots like basically almost like, what are they called, the ninja stars, I forget the technical name of, but you know what I mean. Basically like spiked projectiles, shoots them out. Heated spiked projectiles, I believe. So it's not your typical pellets that it's firing. But anyways, now as for Tally, she does have a pistol, so I think for this one we want to be pretty safe on this and, not go the Predator, but instead take something like the Scorpion, which is pretty established. The Talon is strong, but I think we established is not good for squad mates. They don't really know how to use it. Phalanx is not bad, but yeah, I think it's going to be Scorpion for her. And then Scorpion, I don't remember if that has bonus damage against shields. It might. We'll go bonus damage for that, and it cannot pierce armor. So might as well give her the power damage multiplier, because she is primarily a power character, so that sounds good. So Scorpion there. Then the shotgun. Again, still tough here, because for Tally, she's probably relying more heavily on the shotgun than James will be. This does matter a bit. The Eviscerator is okay. It's solid. It's just that one of the benefits of it is that it has low weight, and that doesn't matter for squad mates. So, you know, if one of the biggest things about it is insignificant, then it does raise some questions. The Claymore is really powerful from a damage standpoint. It is heavy, but you know, it's really short range as well, I believe. Also don't use this one very often, but I think that it's very much needed, the Smart Choke. And then go with the reducing the defenses. I think probably the way to go there. It's a little bit of extra damage against powerful enemies. Otherwise, you go for the basic damage here. Although I think she's going to be packing enough of a punch that even normal enemies should still be doing pretty well against. For just a single shot, perhaps, might be enough to take them out. So, okay, that's, I think, good setup for weapons on everybody here. Again, taking some risk with the Grawl and maybe even with the Claymore. Claymore, very close range, so like, for Tally, not going to have a lot of ability to hit people from afar. For James, we're going to be relying on that Typhoon to give us most of our ranged ability. So hopefully that still works and doesn't come back to bite us. Then for abilities, we have recently invested in Defense Matrix, so we're all leveled up here. Tally has a whole bunch of levels, even James does, to be honest. Because it has been so long since we last used him. I'm actually surprised that he only has 22 points here. I would have thought, if anything, it would be somewhere like on the order of 40. That I cannot recall when we last used him. So let's see. For James, where do we leave off? We do have a little bit of everything here. For anything that's going to be particularly relevant against the Geth, though, for Arms Master, his passive, let's see, I think for that, I was thinking we would go, the decreased shield recharge delay is really nice, defensively, and there are going to be a lot of ways in which we can lose shields in this mission. That reason to make this completely insignificant because James isn't going to have shields anyway, or is it a way to make up for that fact? Not sure about that. Not sure about that. And then I was also thinking we'd go Fortification to increase health and shields. Melee damage part not as significant. Squad bonus to health and shields, I believe, is bugged. And is very... They're like the most obscure slash... just strange ways in which you can make it possible to trigger this and increase squad mate health and shields by 20%, which would include Shepard, but it's just really unreliable because for the most sense it is bugged and just doesn't work for anyone other than James. I think it does still always work for James, but yeah. So these are options. They're of course expensive as they're toward the end of the tree. Otherwise, Fortification, yeah, we just didn't quite get as far as we wanted to get here. I think we were really looking to increase the damage reduction, which we could do if we leveled this up here. So I'm tempted to go that route. I feel like this is not the squishiest, or this is not the tankiest of teams here. So we are going to be relying on James to, at least Tally and Shepard are not. So we're going to be relying on James to take the point and take most of the hits damage-wise. Increase shield recharge rate. That, I think, is what we're going to go with here. Otherwise, it's increased power damage, and it's just not really what James is all about. So we go here. Then we can increase his durability even further. This would cost 6, so he wouldn't have much left after that, for what it's worth. Means we'd have, what, 7 remaining? So we could go get the shield recharge and then put 1 more point into Carnage if we'd like to. Yeah, offensively, we're not giving him much to work with here, but basically because he's going to be getting all of his damage from the Typhoon. We're hoping that's sufficient. So, and the power recharge speed doesn't really matter for James because he's just not using powers all that often. And with his Fortification active, he's not using them as often, or that's making him being able to use them even less often because it gives the penalty for power recharge speed. So yeah, I think we do go the durability route here. Just make him a bit tankier in that sense and in this sense as well. And then, sure, why not? We'll throw one more point into... Oh, Carnage, because 20 seconds. I don't even think that's including the penalty from having Fortification on. That is snail-like pace. So yeah, that's what I mean. He's not going to be using his powers all that often. So that's James. But then we have Tally, who has quite literally every power left to spend. Actually, out of curiosity, health-wise, we actually have more health and shields than James does, but he has that extra defensive layer from his Fortification, which at this point is stronger than our defense matrix. So, Tally, for you, energy drain, we talked about it recently, gets rid of shields and enemy barriers on any type of enemy very effectively. Has, I believe it's a ×3 multiplier for that. So even if you're looking at this number, you're going, I'm not a huge fan of 340, 385 damage, which is actually still solid. Certainly, by the time you get up to 400 or more, once you're stacking all those damage mods. Multiply that by 3 against shields and barriers, it's a big deal. So it works against shields and barriers for anyone. It works against any synthetic enemies, even if they don't have shields or barriers. So that's why Tally is still, yes, primarily a synthetic specialist, but does still have some ability to do some big things against organic enemies as well. So I think for her, we are going to prioritize going with energy drain. This is definitely going to be one of her calling cards. The recharge speed is quite slow, but I think we can make this much faster. So that's going to improve it. Then if we go increase the damage here, again, with the multiplier against barriers and shields, I think it can be a pretty big deal. Then it does also, so it was an ability in Mass Effect 2 for what it's worth, but it has changed a bit in Mass Effect 3. One of those things that has changed is that I think in Mass Effect 2 it just did not work at all against synthetic enemies if they were down with, if they had already lost their barriers and shields, whereas it does work on any synthetic enemy here. So that's new. And then I think it didn't have a starting radius in Mass Effect 2, if I remember correctly. 1.5 meters is not much, but if there are enemies that are pretty much standing next to each other, then yeah, I can hit a couple. I think it is still limited to hitting a maximum of 2 enemies, though, even if you increase the radius here to 3 meters, which at that point, you're probably going to pretty reliably hit a couple of enemies. So, or I might be mixing that up with one of her other abilities. This might have an unlimited number of targets, if you can, as long as you can hit them in. Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, it does. If you can, I'm pretty sure. If you get a bunch of people in this radius, then you can hit a bunch of people in the radius. But the question, of course, then becomes, are you using this to primarily really remove the shields in their entirety from a big enemy like an Atlas, like a powerful Geth? Or are you concerned about multiple shielded enemies and removing all the shields from all those guys simultaneously, even if that means you might not be able to one-shot shields on some bigger enemies? And a little bit tough to say. I think for Tally, though, I think we do go for the pure damage because, I mean, against Geth, yes, there are going to be times when there are multiple shielded enemies. True. However, against other enemies, usually we're only going to see 1 or 2 that are shielded or barriered at a time. Or at least in the same general area that are going to be within that radius. So then we have the option of draining further. So right now, it deals damage and leeches back 50% of the damage that Tally deals as shields to her. But if we take this, then it leeches all that damage back as shields to her. So very good defensively. Or we increase the recharge speed, or improve the recharge speed, which basically takes off a couple of seconds there. I think before we do this, let's go to her Quarian Machinist, because this is where she's going to get a lot of recharge time, I think. And once we do that, in addition to giving her health and shields, I think we're going to start to see that recharge speed shouldn't be a huge problem for her, because she's already at 60% with just rank 3 in her passive. So suddenly, energy drain was previously at 12 seconds. We would reduce it down to 10 seconds, 12.5 to 10.5. Now it's 8.5 to 7.5. So that's not as big of a deal there. 1 second versus restoring all of her shields. I think it might be worth restoring all of her shields here. I think so. For Shepard, without question, it would. If you have energy drain on Shepard, it would without question be worth using the drain here. It's just that there are sometimes enemies that don't target our squad mates as much as they target Shepard, and of course, if Shepard goes down, it's game over. If the squad mate goes down, it's not. And damage, again, to increase it further to 539, which is solid by itself. Then if you consider the whole ×3 damage multiplier against barriers and shields, that's huge. So that's pretty impressive for single target damage. So that is really tempting. Or alternatively, you could go with armor boost, which basically increases Tally's defenses after having done this, but I mean the damage, right? Like the damage, right? It's more damage. It's more damage. Okay, so there's that. Then, if we're looking at this, let's just double check what comes next. More recharge speed, which is just insane. 40% here. I think let's not get too carried away with that, because there are other abilities that I'd like for us to spend some time on. Sabotage, which, I can't remember Sabotage. Did it exist in Mass Effect 2? It definitely existed in Mass Effect 1. It was basically a way of messing with enemies' weapons so that they couldn't use them temporarily. It is technically now a combination of that ability and also AI hacking from Mass Effect 1. So basically against organics, it sabotages their weapons. There's this brief delay and then it deals damage to them. For synthetics, it controls them. And interestingly, in Mass Effect 1, the types of enemies you could control with Sabotage was based on what level Sabotage was. You had to fully upgrade Sabotage if you wanted to have the ability to hack major enemies. However, in Mass Effect 3, as long as a synthetic enemy is within the radius, you can hack it. Doesn't matter if it's the weakest possible synthetic enemy or if it is the strongest possible synthetic enemy, you can hack it. So that's pretty sweet. And, well, the recharge time is humongous here, but as we were saying, we're expecting for that to go down over time, and maybe we can lower it even further with some more upgrades to Tally's passives if we want to go that route. But let's see. So we want to at least have the first level of this, because sabotage weapons, hack synthetic enemies, they fight on our side. The synthetic enemies, at least. And if we're expecting to go against Geth, being able to hack Geth to side with us would be pretty nice. So this is the one that I was thinking about that only can hit 2 enemies. Even if you hit multiple people in the radius, it's only going to ever turn 2 enemies into allies. So that's why, like, radius is not a huge deal. But by the time we get up to... Well, rank 2 is recharge. Okay, so that's definitely significant. Then I think you can only hit 2 enemies per sabotage max. However, in multiplayer, it might just be that I rarely use sabotage, and the one time that I used it aggressively was when I was doing a mod that had buffed sabotage in some ways. It might be that you can actually stack multiple sabotages, though, if your recharge speed and duration... Recharge speed is low enough and duration is long enough, then you might actually be able to get a second round of hacked enemies, and then if you got 2 for both sabotages, you would be at a maximum of 4. But as we see here, it takes longer to recharge than we have time for the hack being active. So unless and until we make that improvement. But before we go that route, and then eventually we can have it so that enemies that get hacked explode on death, dealing a fair bit of damage, or increase the recharge speed, and then at the end we can have enemies move really fast and deal way more damage when they get hacked, or have it so that they take way more damage to tech powers while they are hacked. So those are the options there, but I think most importantly, just want to make sure we have at least some levels in that so that it's usable. But I do want to take a look at the drones, because they, although may not be that exciting in the way that they are described, the way that they sound, they are actually quite useful. So the combat drone, there are two drones, combat and defensive drone. Previously, Tally tended to just have one drone. They move slower in Mass Effect 3, but they have some additional utility in this case. So the combat drone is a little more aggressive, whereas the defense drone is a little more passive. So the combat drone will actively seek enemies out, whereas the defensive drone will just sort of hang out right next to us, and if enemies get close, it'll hit them. The damage from the drones tends to be low, but what it does do is it's really good at stunning enemies and incapacitating them, making it easier for us to take on large groups. So the combat drone deploys this attack drone to stun targets and draw enemy fire. The attack drone does have shields, and so therefore can get destroyed, whereas the defensive drone actually just has a duration, does not have any shields, and so for that one, just once it wears out, you throw it back on. And you can have both drones, have both drones active simultaneously. So, combat drone. I mean, these are abilities that we would like to upgrade fairly aggressively. The question is mostly just, with our current amount of points, how far can we go into these things? So, the combat drone, our plan is going to be, is we're going to try to get this to be a pretty quick cooldown. And actually, this is one other thing that is very different. In Mass Effect 2, it had a really long cooldown. Mass Effect 3 is way faster. 6.25 seconds, which by the time we get to rank 2 is going to be 5-something seconds, and potentially less than that later on. Maybe not. But, if we do this, then we can get extra damage, extra shields, but eventually we start getting to rank 4s where things get interesting. Either further increase the damage and shields, which just never, damage-wise, never going to be huge. But the detonation, damage is still not that big, but it's certainly a lot bigger than individual drone attacks. But it has a pretty huge radius of 5 meters, and it does have a good chance, I believe, of stunning people. So if you have a quick enough cooldown, you can basically use this combat drone as like a mobile mine. Just send it out after people, have it blow up on them when they get too close. And again, just means that Tally has great ways of doing some crowd control. So I think we want to at least get up to that level. As for whether we want to go further than that, yes, we will eventually. The question is just, can we afford to do it now, or do we need to wait before we do that? So then, defensive drone, as I was saying, no health. It can't actually get destroyed by enemies, can't get targeted by enemies. That's one other thing, is that the combat drone will occasionally distract enemies, and they'll actually attack that rather than us, in addition to stunning them. But the defensive drone, no health, cannot be targeted. It is basically just a passive damage dealer that hangs out right next to us. But it doesn't show here, but I think it's a 30-second duration, something quite long. Might even be a little bit longer than that. And what with it having a 7.5-second recharge time, basically means you should be able to have this up 24/7. So let's at least invest a few points in this. And this one is probably, I think it's generally a little bit lower on damage, but it is perhaps a little bit better in the way of stunning. So I think, let's see, it costs us, what, like 21 points to fully up? How much does it cost us to fully upgrade something? So this is 1, collectively 3, 6, 10, 15, yeah, 21. Okay, so we could fully upgrade this. We'd have 3 points left, which means we could upgrade Sabotage one more time and get it up to a better radius. Or if we don't go all the way for defense drone, which, just to talk about what that would end up being, I think it would be range so that it can stun more people. 7 meters of range. Again, it's hanging out right next to us, so it is basically like the range of almost like firing a gun. And it's not going to actively seek enemies out, so the 7-meter radius around us. Then I think we're probably going to go damage. and range again to further increase that radius, which these numbers are not stacking here, but it would actually get to be quite large at that point. And then after that, you go for Chain Lightning to damage up to 2 additional targets, and suddenly you can hit a lot of enemies that are even a fairly decent range away from you, giving you a good, at least alert as to when someone is sneaking up on you trying to flank you. And that way you hopefully have some time as they're getting stunned to take him out before they become a huge issue. So, like, how willing are we to forego Chain Lightning? Because if we do, then we could get a little more happening on either Sabotage or the passive. Maybe we do try this out, though. I think it's going to make a big difference if it is fully upgraded, whereas the other stuff, Sabotage may be sufficient even without that. It's like 10 meters, and then damaging up to 2 additional targets for 3 total. That's a lot of stuns. It's a lot of stuns, and with 3 additional points, yeah, we can increase the radius. Like, I don't think that's a huge deal. In fact, might even delay this one and instead wait for us to see if we get one more level, because getting the improved recharge speed by 40% is probably more valuable to us than it is to get an extra 30% radius on Sabotage. I think that means we're ready.
We're approaching the Quarian home system. ETA to Rannoch, 5 minutes.
What have you got from the comm buoys?
Pretty much a big old shitstorm, Commander.
Well, that's one way to put it.
Several hundred unique ship signatures engaged in active combat.
Yeah, like I said.
Take us in, Joker.
Don't worry about it. We got stealth systems, right?
Stealth drive engaged. Only way they'll detect us is if you all start singing the Russian national anthem.
Oh. Yeah, they're at war, all right. At least actively in battle.
My cyber warfare suite has accessed their docking protocols.
That was definitely a Quarian ship that just went down. The Geth ones are the ones that are, I don't know, a little more circular? No, that's not even. I don't know how to describe them. Right. They look more like popsicles, the Geth ones.
We find whatever's broadcasting the Reaper signal and shut it down. Tally's our expert on Geth software. She'll be handling hacking and security. Nice to meet you, Sparks.
Sparks?
Yeah, you've got lights in your... head. You're kind of small and jumpy.
Excuse me?
Came out.
If you say so. Shepard, there's a problem. All tubes except one are physically secured.
I see the free one. Pretty torn up, though.
Too risky for the whole team. I'll secure the docking area. Everyone else can follow me over.
Roger that, Commander. We'll just stay here. You know, quietly.
Hang tight. It'll just be a minute.